All right, this is part 2 of lecture number 2, module 2, Germany Triumphant. And we're going to pick it up at slide number 36. In September of 1940, Italian forces under the command of Italian Field Marshal Rodolfo Graziano advanced into Egypt, but the British reclaimed the lost territory in February of 1941, and in March of 1941, the Italians in Egypt surrendered to British General Wavell's forces. On October the 28th of that year, a month after Mussolini committed forces in Egypt, Italian forces, if you look at the map there, represented by green, they attacked Greece by way of Albania. And with the support of the British, the Greeks were able to push the Italians back across the border in March of 1941. And in an effort to bail out his fascist partner, Adolf Hitler, German forces, represented by red on the map, invaded Greece by way of Bulgaria on April the 6th, 1941. And of course, this was codenamed Operation Marita. Remember that I told you in the first lecture that we would talk about a lot of different operations. And so you're going to want to keep these straight in your mind, the names of these and what they're associated with. So we've talked about several already. We've talked about case yellow, case green, case white, case red, and now we've also talked about Operation Weser, and this is Operation Marita, and it's the German invasion of Greece. And the Axis were so successful because they had created a second front and attacked Greece from two different directions. Slide 37. After Greece fell, Hermann Goering, who was the leader of the Luftwaffe, convinced Hitler to take the island of Crete, since there was just a small group of ill-equipped Allied troops defending it. The Germans launched Operation Mercury on May the 20th, 1941, and Operation Mercury, better known as the Battle of Crete. Interestingly, next slide, the Germans opened Operation Mercury by dropping 10,000 German paratroopers, or Fallschirmjägers, and used 750 glider-borne troops along the entire northern coast of Crete. And this marked the second time Luftwaffe paratroopers would be used in an air assault. And if you recall, the first time they did this was landing on the Belgian fort of Ibn Emael during Operation Fall Gelb. And by June the 1st of 1941, the battle for Crete was over and the Germans controlled the island. Next slide. One ironic outcome from the Battle of Crete was that the Allies were so impressed by the performance of the German paratroopers that they started to develop their own airborne formations. And mainly, we see this with the U.S. 82nd, the All-Americans, and the U.S. 101st, or the Screaming Eagles airborne divisions, and the British 1st Airborne Division. If you look at that slide, you may recognize the guy second from the left there. Next slide. For Hitler, the Mediterranean campaign of 1940-1941 presented the perfect diversion for what he had been planning for Stalin and the Soviet Union. In the fall of 1940, Hitler welcomed with open arms Romania into the Axis, and in March of 1941, he persuaded Bulgaria to join as well. And after a coup, the new Yugoslavian government refused to join Hitler, so he bombed the capital of Yugoslavia, Belgrade, on April the 6th. The same day, his forces invaded Crete. On April the 18th, the Yugoslavian government unconditionally surrendered to the Nazis. And of course, this played right into Hitler's hands as it resulted in a substantial decrease in British forces that were left in North Africa. Of course, Hitler was not about to let this golden opportunity slip by, and so he ordered arguably one of his most successful generals, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. He sent him to North Africa in the spring of 1941 to help the battered Italians and to prevent a total Axis collapse in North Africa. Next slide. Erwin Rommel was arguably one of the greatest military tacticians there ever was. His nickname was the Desert Fox, and he was called that by his enemies because he would consistently outfox them, outmaneuver them. Churchill, frustrated with the current leadership in British leadership in North Africa, replaced General Wavell and General Auchinleck with Generals Harold Alexander and Bernard Montgomery. Next slide. Montgomery defeated Rommel's Afrika Korps at the Battle of El Alamein, a crucial turning point in the war for North Africa. And speaking of the Afrika Korps, this was the German Army's desert fighters. And I'm going to turn the camera a little bit, and if you look at the behind me there, you'll see a tan uniform tunic, and that is what the Afrika Korps wore. And so I also have a helmet somewhere in here that it's a pith helmet, if you will, a sun helmet, that the Afrika Korps wore as well. Hopefully I'll be able to show that to you. And so, slide 43, while Montgomery was keeping Rommel busy in Egypt, the Allies were planning the first massive invasion of the war into Vichy-occupied North Africa, codenamed Operation Torch. The invasion would mark the first time American troops would fight in the Mediterranean Theater of Operations, or the MTO. Next slide. After some hard fighting, the Vichy French surrendered on November the 11th, 1942. Hitler was furious at this Vichy surrender, and he ordered German troops into southern France to take over the Vichy government there. He then sent German troops from Sicily into Tunis, the capital of Tunisia. And by early February of 1943, the Germans arrogantly believed that they had the situation in hand, and so they attacked the U.S. Second Corps at the Battle of the Kasserine Pass. That happened in Tunisia on Valentine's Day, 1943. The battle only lasted 6 days, and American forces were essentially wiped out. Now why? Next slide. In 1942, the only tanks in the U.S. inventory were the U.S. M3 Stuart light tank and the M4 Sherman medium tank. The Stuart tank was named for Confederate General Jeb Stuart. It only had 2 inches of frontal armor. It had a short 37 millimeter main gun. Of course, the Sherman tank was named for Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman and used a 75 millimeter main gun. Now, I'm going to go grab something just over here in my study here, and I want to show you this, so give me 1 second. Okay. Now, both of these tanks proved no match for the German Panzer VI Tiger tank. These German Tiger tanks, were freshly rolled off the assembly lines. Now, the Tiger tank weighed a massive 54 tons. It had 5 inches of armor protection in the front, and it boasted the most powerful tank gun of the Second World War, and it fired this shell. And you got to really see this in person to get the full effect here. This is a German 88 millimeter tank shell. Actually, this is a flak shell. The tank shell would have been painted red instead of yellow. But you can see the German markings, all that, the date and all that. You say, well, man, how would you get this, Brother Wells? Well, I can't reveal my secrets. Okay. All right. The dreaded 88. Next slide. Slide 47. The 88 millimeter shell, the one you just looked at, was originally designed to be used in German anti-aircraft guns, known as flak guns. And flak is a concentration of a German word that means aircraft defense cannon. The 88 millimeter shell weighed over 25 pounds. It was over 3 feet long, as you just saw, and had a muzzle velocity of 2,690 feet per second. So that's moving. There was not a tank in the war that could withstand a direct hit from the 88 millimeter shell. Next slide. And although the United States kind of got a bloody nose at the Kasserine Pass, the battle exposed several flaws in the American command structure and American fighting doctrine, which were quickly corrected. And probably the most significant adjustment was the replacing of the Second Corps commander, General Friedendahl, with old blood and guts George S. Patton. And while Rommel was battling out with the British in the spring of 41, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa on June the 22nd, 1941. And so we will talk about that. Lesson 3, Module 3 will be next, and we'll discuss the Russo-German War or the Eastern Front.